welcome.
Right, thanks for having us. I'm assuming you guys have all met Chris Saywick, our other accountant in the department, just as you haven't. You had Chris Saywick today in lieu of Paul. So do bear with us, this is not our presentation. So reserves, we'll start off, if you like, why do we have them? So reserves have been created to ensure funds received for a particular purpose or any surpluses generated through any activity are held for the use that the purpose or activity was for. So in essence, ring fences the revenue received, surpluses generated for the purpose of that the reserve was created. And we have three different natures of reserves, from the general, targeted, specific, and other, which generally revolve around our rating activities. So we try to keep everything that we've rated ring fenced within the reserves that it was gathered for. And we go to the next slide, and we'll start going into the specifics. So types of reserves, we have these specific reserves. These reserves are created specifically for a purpose. So we have, for example, the MacArthur Book Committee, the Anderson Trust Facilities, and the A. George Reserve. And so these are bequests that are only available for a specific purpose. So we can't just use these reserves to fund up the pool. We have to use it for the MacArthur Book Committee, or in the terms of the A. George Trust, it's for maintaining a grave site. Other reserves we've got include Chateau Creek, Clyde, Omakau Reserve Committees, as well as the Tyree Lake Reserves Committees. And these reserves are only available for the purposes specified for those reserves as well. Right, please. So then we have the general reserves. So these are created from funding and surpluses from the activities funded from either the general rate or the uniform annual general charge. Currently, we have separate reserves for the general rate and the UAGC. The current revenue and financing policy does not differentiate the two, and they should be considered as general rates, and as such all funds all general activities. So these two reserves should be combined into a general reserve.
Was it historical that we've had two collection points rather than one?
I think it's just the fact that we have the two rates. So you have the uniform annual general charge, which is a small fixed portion of your general rate, and then the rest goes through the general rate, which is portioned either on land or capital value, off the top of my head. But in general, therefore, general activities, just one part is fixed and the other is variable. So then we go into we go back to Sarah. Targeted reserves. So these reserves funding activities via a targeted rate. So they tend to be district-wide activities, but are usually only available to specified activities. So some activities may be funded from the same rate. Any reserves created in this manner can be used for those activities. For example, the district works and public toilets rate. Next slide. So we go on to the ward targeted reserves. So the ward targeted reserves, these are reserves. These reserves are the same as targeted reserves, except they're collected by targeted rates at a ward level. There is a further level of complexity with the introduction of rate harmonisation across the district. For most of these activities, funded through ward targeted rates. This will create stranded reserves, as the activities that were normally funded through the ward activities targeted rates are now district funded through district-wide rates. For example, the old Vincent recreation and culture activities such as parks and reserves, swimming pools are now funded from a targeted rate. Were funded from a targeted rate at ward level and now part of the community facilities rate at a district level. Questions about that, about the reserves?
What's happening with the stranded stuff that's
So this presentation will take you through an idea that we're putting forward and which way we can resolve all of the surpluses and deficits within the Vincent ward to kind of basically come out as nil. So next we have internal loans. So what are they? So internal loans are a method of project funding that defines a project cost, uses current reserves to fund the project and sets a rating level to replenish the reserve within a governance group. It isn't really a loan. It is just using money from one fund and then replenishing it at a later date. It can also be used to fund projects between governance group. This more represents a loan. There are a few for the Vincent ward in particular, which have used district funds or Cromwell ward funds to fund activities within the Vincent ward. So we'll go into more detail as we go through. Most loans have been set up where the lender and the borrower are from the same governance group. So for example, there was Many-a-Toto lending to Many-a-Toto projects. And we have 4.09 million of internal loans. Of this, 2.848 million is lent by a governance group to itself.
you just record those on line items on the balance sheet as they roll through.
Yes. Yeah, so they do sit as a liability and then they're offset on the other side. So they do come through council report. We actually have a list of them that comes through in our monthly financials, but we will have a wee list here for you to show you a bit more.
And so apart from the first ones, which clearly you can get repaid, how do you reconcile over time the rest of them? Do they just stay there or do they strategy for?
This is the strategy going forward to sort of tidy them up as we're now harmonised in through the district side. So we can't really rate fund only Vincent ratepayers for a loan that they put in for, say, the ISIM line, because it's now district. So we'll have actually Teviot, Many-a-Toto and Cromwell ratepayers all contributing to that loan fund, which they didn't sign up for. So.
It's all 0% interest rates loans, the internal loans?
No, so they all use our weighted average interest rate based on term deposit rates because it is being factored in as a loan. So it's the same concept as if your reserve was in deficit, you would be getting charged interest. If your reserve was in surplus, you'd be earning interest revenue. So it operates on the same concept, just a different way of showing it. But in general, they're both, either reserves or internal loans. They are the same thing. They're all internal funding rather than external funding. So issues, what are they? So reserves and internal loans that either created via targeted ward rates or rely on targeted ward rates for repayment could become stranded, can't be used for any other activity other than which they were rated for due to the rates harmonisation. Deficit reserves and internal loans cannot easily be returned to nil by the communities that created them via rates, as targeted rates are no longer being levied on those communities. Can be seen as unfair if the ratepayers at other community boards areas have to pay via the district rates for past deficits. So how can we eliminate the deficit targeted reserves and internal loans, and how do we utilise those reserves in surplus? Is it possible to ensure that the reserves are ring-fenced and the financial consequences remain within the appropriate governance group? For example, the district funds are not used to eliminate community board deficits if possible. A governance group is a community board or the council itself. So last question would be, how can we eliminate internal loans appropriately to ensure that loans between governing bodies are dealt with? So next slide. So this is a bit of a breakdown of the internal loans. So currently there are 4.09 million and it's been broken into who is the lender. So you can see there at the top you have a Cromwell loan. Second line from the top, which is from the General Reserve, Vincent, for the Alexandra Town Centre of 87,000. And then if we go down into the district section, there are 3 internal loans for Vincent there as well, from Tarbert Street Building, Alexandra Town Centre and ANZ Bank Strengthening. And then we go down to our own Vincent area at the bottom, and there's further loans there for the Alexandra Town Centre, the Molyneux Pool, and also the Isom Line roof upgrade. If I'm correct, so both the Molyneux Pool and the Isom Line are both Isom Line loans.
Yep, they're just paid out of the Molyneux Pool cost centre, but they relate to Isom Line loans in the past.
Further to that, we also earmarked for this financial year the Omaka Community Hub loan of 333,000 and also an Alexandra River Park loan starting for repayment of 650,000. Next slide. So the proposed treatment is proposed to undertake the following. So where loans are by a governance group to itself, then the loans are written off. So what that means is that it's already come out of your general reserve. It's been been used to pay down the deficit in the other reserve, and so therefore if we net it all off together, it is a nil impact. So you're just not going to be charging the ratepayers in the district for the repayment of that loan. It already balances off. So there is currently no ability to collect the revenue, which is why we've got this wee bit of a conundrum, and that would run contrary to the concept of the districtisation. So where the loan is between the governance group, it is proposed to transfer the relevant closing balance of the loan to the relevant general reserve of the governance group where the loan was made up and the appropriate reserve borrowing activity. So proposed loan write-offs. So these are all of the ones which can be written off within its own governance group. So you'll see the ones down at the bottom for the Vincent area. We have an Alexandra Town Centre loan and the Molyneux Pool and Isom line. It's there as well. We also do have the Omaka Community Hub and the ability to do the Alexandra River Park as well. Just noting with the Alexandra River Park, there is the additional funding that was given out of the Financial Reserves Contribution Fund of 400,000, which won't impact this at all. And then the Omaka Community Hub had the additional funding streams if required as well. So loans between governance groups, so loans that will be transferred back to the appropriate general reserve. And so there's a wee bit of a list there. So you'll see the Alexandra Town Centre Reserve will decrease by 87. The Vincent Tarbert Street Building Reserve will decrease by 7. And the Alexandra town centre reserve will decrease by 28, and then the ANZ bank strengthening reserve decrease by 125,000. Right. So at the moment, we are still using estimated closing balances for our 30 June 2025 numbers. So these numbers are subject to change. And so we have an estimated closing balance of targeted reserves of 18.25 million, which is made up as below, with the Vincent area being 8.9 million in reserve surplus. Slide. So next following slides will be specifically for the Vincent area, and these are the proposals that we are proposing. So we are looking at transferring out of other reserves Vincent $618,000, and we're going to pay down deficits in the Molyneux Park, the Pioneer Park, X Hall, Clyde Recreation Reserve, and also the Omaka Recreation Reserve. On to the next slide. So we've got the transfers from the General Reserve Vincent of $6.17 million. So we've got the transfer to the Molyneux Stadium for the budgeted capital of $4.7 million as per Community Board's resolution. Then we've also got the transfer through to the Omaka Hub for the budgeted capital of $600,000. In the Clyde Recreation Reserve Committee, this balance there, this tidying up the Pines Forestry balance, and the Alexandra Cemetery, as well as Tarbert Street. Right. And we've got a few more there. So we've got the deficit through the central stories, further deficit in the town centre. There's a couple of town centre reserves there, which we just need to tidy up. I think they're all from previous very historical projects. And there's also a balance in the Valence Cottage area as well that needs to be settled. So reading this, it says it will leave a balance of about $1.3 million in the general reserves. And then there's the $300,000 to come out of that for the Dunstan Turf project. And then we're looking at a significant variance in our Molyneux pool that we will have to sort out into the future as well. So we've also got a surplus in the elected members area. So we're going to transfer those through to the below projects on below cost centres on Tarbert Street, as they're all rated through the same areas, and transferring of the Vincent property general to cover further deficits in the property space. So the next table is the detail. So it shows you what our estimated closing balances are for each of those reserve funds that you would see in a community board meeting, and the reserve balance adjustment. So it also shows you whether there's an internal loan write-off or not, and then what the opening balance will likely look like into the future. So the main game of this is to allow for activities that you have made decisions on for the future to have the funding available to them, but also to ensure that your deficits have been maintained within this as well. You will notice that the Molyneux pool does have the reserve balance written off. I do have a wee question which I just have to follow up with for Chica's math. To ensure that the Omaka Hub in entirety has been funded for, but the likelihood is that it will be the Molyneux pool that will remain as an outstanding deficit in this balance. So apologies for that, it was sort of last minute and I wasn't able to see all of his math. Yeah, so we go on to the next slide. There's a few more reserve accounts and all the ins and outs will go. I'm assuming we'll send these slides out soon.
Yeah, I'm ready to go.
So we go on to the next slide. We'll talk about the Molyneux pool deficit. So at the moment, it has a deficit of approximately 1.795 million, which has been contributed from based on operational overspends as well as capital expenditure, with lower than expected revenues going into the area as well. And that's just something that's happened progressively over the years. So it's nothing that happened just last year. It has been a few years. And with COVID closing the pools down for a little bit, that would have also hampered a bit of the admission. This swim users, swim pool users. So what Paul has got here is proposed action. He's wanting to take the endowment land fund, which currently has $706,000, along with a balance in the property general fund of $82,000, that could be applied to reduce the balance to $1 million. So this does reduce the deficit, but it does not eliminate it. We kind of thought maybe we could propose to use the remaining land sales from Dunstan Park to be applied to be used to offset this deficit. And then we'll be ensuring that the Omega hub is fully funded there as well.
Just to note, sorry from the cheap seats, for the Mayor and Tracy, we had realised that the bottom one, we had told you basically essentially it would all wash through, and that we could cover all the deficits. We realised that we hadn't quite raised the money before the Omega hub. So just in case it was flickering in a memory going, oh, that's a little bit different, the team just realised that this morning. So yeah.
That 1.6 was effectively underwriting the project, wasn't it?
Yes.
So until you get the thing over the line, you won't know.
Yes, that is correct. Yeah. And we're just not 100% sure whether the initial funding from the first $1 million has been included in these balances. So we're sort of just quite cautious on that fact. Before we start paying down a deficit, we want to actually be able to use your general reserves as you guys have already, so you would like to use them.
So just to get my thinking in the same page as yours, up until the last 2 points, I thought we were dealing predominantly with internal, effectively balance sheet kind of stuff and not touching cash in the bank. Now all of a sudden, touching cash in the bank.
So we are touching both. They are both in essence balance sheet activities. It's just one is recognised in liabilities and one is recognised in what we call ratepayers equity as a reserve balance.
But for each liability, you've got a corresponding asset on that counterparty, though, so they're internal without swapping checks to clear them out, eh?
Yes, and so they both operate the same way. So in your internal loans, if you had a surplus in a reserve and you had a deficit in another one, you could have used the internal loans as a structured process for a repayment process. And so therefore you would have decreased a reserve and increased another one so that the deficit became zero. And in turn, it would have flipped over and moved into a liability and would have sat in liabilities. And so it would have raised the asset on the other side for the loan, the reserve you initially took the loan out from, and then your other loan was sit on top. So they don't separate, they sort of just net each other off in liabilities.
So our opening balance of 8.9 of reserves for Vincent, is that represented in a bank account?
It is represented in the council's overall reserve balances and net cash flow. So while you might have $8 million in surplus reserves, the council's reserve accounts are actually in deficit, and so we've been maintaining our cash flows, utilising those reserve surpluses rather than uplifting external debt, which is a bit more expensive.
Okay, so that's what first. So up until those last 2 points, we were all just dealing with balance sheet adjustments, but now all of a sudden we're talking cash.
So in essence, if we needed to fully utilise your $8 million, we would have to actually go to the bank and borrow to be able to access that $8 million. But at the moment, we're just utilising internal cash flows to ensure our peak balances. And the remaining 8 million is, we have to do to ensure that we're going to be covering balancing your reserve balance in essence, because you do have deficits on some side with surpluses on the other. And then you've also earmarked your surplus reserves for future projects as well. So we have to ensure that we've covered both sides and that you can actually cover the deficits from the decisions that you've made in the past. The committee has made in the past. So we move on to the next slide. So there will be reserves and surplus at ward level that cannot be really utilised now due to the districtisation. It is proposed that when funding is required to work within a community board area of interest, that the relevant ward reserve is used first. For example, if a project or capex or program of work is approved to be done on the Ranfurly railway station, that the reserves used first to undertake the work. The district then providing funds once the ward reserve is used up. It is anticipated that this type of work will make it into council's work program after discussions with the relevant community boards during the long-term plan and annual plan processes around work and how it is to be funded. No further funds should be added to the ward reserves with the exception of grants, as the intention is to use them up and replace them with district-wide reserves. Slide. So what happens next? So we're continuing to present to all of the community boards through the process. And we outlined to the council on the 27th of August. We will be preparing a paper to take to the council's final meeting to finalise the districtisation by process. So by elimination, sorry. Eliminating transferring internal loans and eliminating and transferring deficit reserve balances. So these will be with an effective date of the 1st of July 2025, which is the date where we have started under the districtisation model. Question.
Does our harmonisation process account for land assets held? And I'm thinking we've got a bit of an interest. Cromwell's got quite a strong interest in land assets held.
That is unfortunately a question for me. I have not been involved in the actual land.
Okay, any endowment land is specifically for the benefit of the community, of that particular community. All other land is held by and has always been owned by them.
Not everybody across the catchment season, is it?
It's not. But that's the anomaly that was created over the last 30 years, when in fact council has owned all the land. Except for endowment land was endowed for the purposes of that community.
Yeah. An interesting conversation for you then, isn't it? Again.
Right, well, thank you then for that. It was interesting.
It is. I think what it is we're just trying to utilise what you guys have first, balancing it all off and ensuring that what you guys have already committed to, that we will remain committed to, and then we move forward through into the districtisation.
So for community boards going forward, I'm not sure where this question is going to end up, but once we go through, there's a bit of tidying up side of things. For community boards going forward, if there is something that they want to be considered as part of the district-wide reserves, will they be making a recommendation to council, or how is that going to work?
So that would be exactly it, Trace. So the community board could do that at any time, but the most logical time, and we're about to go to the new training, get all the community boards around the LTP process. So that's the prime time the community boards to be saying, this is what's important in our district, this is what needs funding. If it doesn't get through that mechanism, it would be by way of recommendation to council, hey, there's this really cool project, we want you to fund it out of reserves, noting what Donna said earlier, our district-wide reserves are in deficit. So that would appropriately be in our LTP and annual plan.
I'm just thinking, the rubber meets the road, we spent some time talking about museums kind of function, so that would be best served by the LTP.
That one in particular absolutely would be, if you know, but this board was of a mind, you know, to, again, you could do a recommendation to council type thing, that they increase the pot, or that they do what happened with Blossom Festival, or whatever the board wants to view, and then council would make the decision. So it's still very much intended that the community boards have a very, very strong voice, and by way of recommendation is sort of that process to get it through. Yeah, and that's where the lead officer can help navigate that new.
So we've already shown in the last few months how that's going to work successfully. So thank you very much.